Hey guys, my name is Joce, and here on Seasoned with Science today we are doing Koshiki cookies, as well as learning about the difference between using powdered sugar and flour as your coating base. So by day, I am a rocket scientist, quite literally building lunar landers that go to the moon, and by night I am a baker and a cook, and I love doing both so much, bringing that science to you. So today we're going to make Koshiki cookies, which are little tiny cookies with jam in them. It's kind of like a dough-wrapped, delicious jam of Polishness. And I'm going to show you not only how to make them, but also if you should use flour as a base to coat your board while you're rolling them out, or powdered sugar. Both have pros and cons. Briefly, we'll just get into it. Sugar has fewer oxygens, so it attracts less water out of your baked good. Flour has more, because in flour, the item that we're talking about that draws out that water is actually starches, which are huge long molecules that have tons of oxygens and tons of hydrogens on them as well. And that tends to draw a lot more moisture out. So we're going to do a scientific test and see which one is actually better for your cookies. And this doesn't just apply to Koshiki cookies, this applies to cookies across the board. So stay with us, stick with us, and we will get into the science behind it. And welcome to Seasoned with Science. We're here in my home kitchen just like everybody else because it's COVID. And today we are going to be talking about using powdered sugar versus flour, and which is scientifically better to make your baked goods come out delicious and perfect every time. So today we're going to be making Koshiki cookies. I hope I am not totally butchering that pronunciation. Basically, we used to call them little apricot cookies. They're like little bits of dough, and inside is like an apricot filling or some sort of jam, like a jelly, strawberry, something like that. And I absolutely adore them and love them. But I have scoured kind of the internet and realized that there's a lot of different perspectives about if you should use flour or powdered sugar when you're rolling things out, so I wanted to figure out which one was better. Okay, let's come over here to our handy dandy board just to talk about chemical structures for a little bit because that's super fun. Yeah, I'm just gonna hold this. Low production quality here. Okay, so what's really important to know about flour versus sugar is that flour has way more oxygens. But basically in flour, there are at least a minimum of 18 oxygens, and in sugar, there's a maximum of 11. So sugar is known as sucrose, and in flour, the things that attract a lot of water to it are known as amylose, and those are starches. And this is just one starch that's in flour. Anyways, the reason why those oxygens are important is because they attract water. And what that means is it attracts moisture out of your baked good and into the flour or the coating itself. So it can make your baked good dry if you're using more flour, and it can make it too moist if you're using too much sugar. So using this guy, let's figure out which one was actually better. So I'm going to show you guys how to make a Koshiki cookie. Also, I'm going to put that down real quick. Sorry about that. So I'm going to show you how to make a Koshiki cookie. What we have here is an already pre-made dough. I made it like a couple days ago. It's been sitting in the fridge because we had like holidays and stuff. But what I have here is a base of just powdered sugar. So I have a couple bowls over here. One is powdered sugar. One is just regular unbleached, unenriched flour. Pretty standard. You can get them both at any supermarket, Giant Eagle, if you're in Pittsburgh like me, Trader Joe's, Kroger, kind of wherever. Anyway, so we're going to take out a little bit of dough. And what you want to do, since I'm using powdered sugar as my base here, and I'll show you exactly what I did for the flour, which is the exact same process, really. You're just going to coat your rolling pin in powdered sugar. You're going to coat your base in powdered sugar. In this case, I'm just using a cutting board, but if you have something better or just kind of a regular top, you can use that. And then you just roll it out. Really easy. I am realizing, because I've done a few batches of these as I've been filming, that it's really important to make sure you keep your dough cold. So I kept my dough pretty cold for the first batch, and you'll see those. But for my second batch, I didn't. And they kind of all unraveled. And I'll show you how that can happen. So right now I have a third batch chilling in the freezer behind us, right here. And And what we're gonna do is we're gonna see if it comes out better, or if it comes out worse, or the same, because baking and cooking is really all just science. Okay, so we'll keep rolling this guy out. And that's about good. You don't want it too thin, but you don't want it too thick. I probably should have something that can measure the thickness there, but I mean, if you can see, it's pretty flexible. I would say maybe an 1/8 of an inch about in thickness. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut off our edges, make it into a perfect little square or a rectangle, depending on the kind of person that you are, whichever you prefer. All right. Turn it into that guy. So we're gonna cut this. It's about that big. I would say, I don't know what that is, like 3 by 3 inch square. I should use centimeters because metric is so much better. We're gonna cut this in half. We're gonna put those 2 dough pieces on top, and we're gonna cut those in half. So then you are left with little tiny squares. Anyway, with your little tiny square, so some people just put the jam on here and then fold it over and they're good to go. I like to have them a little bit thinner than that, so I roll it out a little bit more to create these, like, a little bit thinner. They kind of look like kites, rhombuses, I guess is the proper term for that, if we're talking about geometry here. Okay, and then we want to add our jam. So our jam's right here. This is a strawberry jam. I know I called them apricot cookies earlier, but people can use kind of like whatever flavor they want. And sometimes you use jam. It's strawberry jam. Sometimes you use strawberry jam. So then you just fill the jam right in here in the middle. And then you also want to use a little bit of water right here. And I could also use some. Delicious. So then you put a little bit of water on. Cover that baby up. There you go. And you have a little Koshiki cookie. I think that's the proper term. I literally just call them apricot cookies. Let me know which you guys call them, if you're Polish, or if you're not Polish, or if you've ever had these before. We were Polish growing up. We are Polish, not were. I don't think you can lose your nationality. But our family comes from Poland, and we call them apricot cookies. But maybe you'll call them Koshiki cookies, or really anything else. I'm not sure if there's another name for it. There are a million different spellings for it. I guess we just all couldn't agree as a society. Okay, let's do that one more time. So remember, what we're testing here is if powdered sugar or if a flour kind of base as you're rolling out your cookie, which one's better. So I did already kind of do this test. I do already happen to know the answer, but we'll get into that later. So you just fill it in the middle here. So powdered sugar, if we can think about what the potential pros and cons are. So we saw that board where there are less oxygens in sugar, or sucrose. So have you ever kind of heard of water being really polarized? Basically, it just means that there's an oxygen and then 2 hydrogens, and the oxygen is more negative than the hydrogens, and the hydrogens are more positive. And a funny thing happens called hydrogen bonding, where this water molecule, the oxygens and the 2 hydrogens, are attracted to other oxygens and hydrogens in different kinds of compounds and elements. So in sucrose, let's bring this guy back up. In sucrose, over here, there's a bunch of different oxygens that we can see. In fact, 11 of them in this specific one. And basically, we're going to have these water molecules, this O and the 2 H's, get attracted and hydrogen bond to different ones here. We're going to see the same thing with our flour, but what's really interesting with our flour, and the starch is what we're primarily talking about, is that there's 300 to 600 additional of this middle part here, which is what? I think 6 more oxygens. So there could be hundreds of more in this one single starch molecule in comparison to sucrose. Yes, sucrose is much smaller, and there will technically be more volume-wise than others, than your starches and your flour that you're going to use kind of as a base here. But the flour uses so much more water. It attracts so much more of it due to those hydrogen bonds. And because of that, flour tends to use it more moisture in your baked good. So generally when you use flour kind of as a base here, when you're rolling out doughs or kind of doing anything that you have to protect or get it off the coating of something, so in a bowl when you're making bread, you'll use oil or flour just to kind of coat it and help it not stick. That additional flour that you add draws out a lot of moisture in your baked good. Sugar draws out a little bit less, but it can sometimes leave your baked good kind of like gummy. So you wouldn't generally use that on bread, because bread you want to be really crispy and delicious, especially on the outside. Okay, back here. So we're gonna wrap up our Koshiki cookie. Really easy. You just dip your hand in the water, roll it over, and then perfect. That's your little Koshiki cookie. Okay, so now let's do a taste test, because I have already made these, and they are really good. Okay, please excuse the clear plate. We have one here, which was made with a flour base. So we're using flour in order to coat everything, and even coat the cookie as we roll it out, and then wrap it up. It might be difficult to see, but it almost has like an egg roll texture. It's like kind of bubbly, and it feels really dry. The bottom's really brown and good, and that looks great. But it's like kind of, I don't know, it feels like a really dry cookie. And then you have this one where we use the powdered sugar, and our powdered sugar kind of as our base here. And it has like these like little like bubbles on it where it like clearly caramelized. Pretty cool. It like feels harder. This one feels a little bit softer. Maybe I can do it like closer to our mic over here. You can't really hear anything there. And then with this one you can with the sugar. Also has a nice bottom that's a bit browner in comparison to our other one. Our other one looks kind of like dull and not as caramelized and cool. I would say this one looks more appetizing to eat, but maybe this one will be actually crispier because it drew out more moisture. I'm not really sure. In any case, let's do a taste test. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the flour one. Okay, not really crispy at all, actually. It doesn't really give me a crisp crunch. Yeah, it's like not crispy at all. It still tastes good, but it's kind of like mushy. By the way, these are baked on the same tray, 350 degrees, 14 minutes. Let's see this one. Ooh, that one has a crunch. That one definitely has more of a crunch. That's interesting. Wow, really good actually. Yeah, I'm gonna keep eating this one. What I think is, I should probably finish doing. What I think is really interesting about between the sugar and the flour one, and I'll put up a picture of this, but the flour one's held together a lot better, and the sugar one's unrolled. So I'm trying to figure out what that was. And I think it might be the temperature of the dough. So I popped the dough in the freezer, and we'll do a comparison after with the cold dough. Comparison to the almost room temperature dough with the sugar coating, because I did another base with the sugar coating, and the batch with the sugar coating, because I thought that was really good. But those ones are way better. Wow. Way better. So I mean, I would go so far to say that because the sugar caramelizes on the outside of your baked good, and it creates this really nice crunch to it, way better to use for like cookies, even pie crusts, because it creates this just like, wow, delicious like crunch, and it gives like a really nice brown to it that I haven't seen with the flour ones yet. I thought they taste bad. They're just not as good. Maybe that's the secret to all of the chefs who make really delicious pie doughs. They're using powdered sugar instead of flour, which is interesting. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna keep eating because they're delicious. And they taste about the same. The sugar one has additional crunch. And that is really interesting that it drew out less moisture, but it has an additional crunch because those sugars must have melted down and created kind of a caramelization around it. Really good. Oh. Really like those. Okay. We should also probably go through the recipe of how to make that dough. Super simple. It's butter, cream cheese, flour, a little bit of sugar, and salt. Creates a very basic dough. You can make it in your KitchenAid, which is what I always do. And then you have to let it rest for a little bit. You want it cold. Usually about a day is good. The one that I made I think I only had it resting for probably about 4 or 5 hours. And then I took it out and it was cold enough for me to kind of roll out and make some initial cookies. And then I redid it a couple days later. I had extra dough in the fridge and I remade the cookies and they were still really good. So the dough holds for probably about a week and you can freeze it too and it'll hold for a couple weeks. I made the filling, really interestingly, with jam. If you've never had this, it's Bon Maman jam. And I really love it. It's apricot preserves, if you can't tell. It's like totally empty. It's so good. So that was just a little bit of cornstarch and it helps it not kind of all melt out. And I think definitively from this test, we can say that the sugar is much better to use as a coating when you're rolling out your cookies in the flour because it gives a caramelization and a crunch. Who would have known? Okay, so using the cold freezer to make the cookies look better kind of worked, and like kind of didn't. So some of these came out a lot better, I would say, I would argue. The jam still leaked out, so that kind of sucks. But they are crispy and crunchy, and like the bottom is still really beautiful. So that's cool, but some did unravel, like out of this 12, one, I guess really only like one unraveled, and then like 2 like half unraveled. So like we'll say that as like 2 unraveled out of 12. Not bad. So I guess here is what I would recommend when you're making Koshiki cookies. Or really kind of any dough that has to like hold its shape really well. Okay, use powdered sugar as your base because it's going to give you that caramelization and the crunch on the outside that flour won't. Turns out for these cookies, it doesn't really matter about drawing that moisture out of your cookie. These actually, the doughs are flakier, I would say, for the powdered sugar coated ones. So it's probably because it did draw less moisture out. So definitely use powdered sugar to coat and roll out your doughs. And you get this beautiful flaky texture. And then freeze them, pop them in the freezer again for maybe like 5-10 minutes just to help them really chill and cool down. And what that's going to do is that's going to recool your butter and your cream cheese that's in the dough of these cookies. And that's going to help create that lamination and those really delicious layers. And there will be a video about that later. But so it's going to do that for you. And it's going to taste a lot better because you're going to get like the flakiness that you get in a croissant. And then also make sure that you bake these at 350 for 14 minutes. And that seems to be giving me the best for my oven. So it may be a little bit different for your oven. I would say it's plus or minus 1 to 2 minutes there. But that's going to make a Koshiki cookie. I mean, this one came out great. Look how beautiful that little guy is. Love him. Great bottom too. Very brown. Very crispy. Very delicious. My friends are getting these as Christmas gifts, but don't tell them. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today on Seasoned with Science. Hopefully you learned a little bit about using flour or powdered sugar as your base when you're rolling out your cookies. Hopefully this helps you make some delicious Koshiki cookies. I'll be sure to post a recipe below as well that you can use for your Koshiki cookies to make them as delicious and perfect as these little guys turned out. Thanks guys.